My name's John Powers. I work with Field Service in the Midwest. Al Zabo's here today, and Tom Vinacinque over here to my right pretty much set up the display for you as well. First thing we're going to go through is AquaFlash, which is a fluid-applied splining material. Tom already started to do the application around windows. That product is required with the moisture drainage systems such as Outsolation Plus, which I'm sure they went over previously today, around your window penetrations, HVAC penetrations, the top of the wall, the base of the wall. And then also, normally what happens once they install the windows, then you'd have a head flashing component, and then they would actually treat over the top of that again. Now, in the past, when we first started utilizing these moisture drainage systems, we used a peel and stick membrane, which is still an option today. Peel and stick comes in 3 different widths, 4, 6, and a 9-inch. And it's basically a self-adhesive, so you just peel the paper and place it on the wall. The unfortunate part of that is once it sticks to itself, you can't get it back away from itself, so I'll pass it around. The key is you don't want to get it on you, okay? This product has a 30-day exposure limitation to it. The AquaFlash product has no exposure limitation to it. It's about half the cost of this product. Labor-wise, it's virtually the same. So it's just a matter of the installation steps. But again, this is flashing tape. It would just come in a roll. For any of you that haven't seen the product, 4 and 6, 9-inch, just like this. And then once you just cut it off, then you just peel it off the roll and cut it to length. Okay? So that's basically called the Dryvit flashing tape. You want to pass that around. Now, with the AquaFlash product, and this is a great tool that Al Zabo utilizes with his distributors, and he provided some of us with that as well too. It basically shows the representation of what typically we're going to utilize this product for, either with metal studs and a gypsum sheathing or with wood framing and a gypsum sheathing in conjunction with a product that's called Backstop NT. You'll see us apply that product a little bit later on. Typically that would go over the entire wall surface. The AquaFlash would treat expansion joints, the window and door openings and other penetrations, and then again the top and the bottom of the wall. And so that's an example of the product. You can touch and feel this one. Obviously when we're going to apply these products you won't want to touch them. Only tools that you typically need is either a brush or a roller. I would strongly encourage that you use a brush. What you'll find is when you try to apply it with a roller, it won't be able to get into the corner and tuck the mesh in there. So it's just much easier to use a brush. Typically it's a throwaway situation. After you use it for a day, if you let it dry out in the air, it's a piece of plastic, and so you're just going to throw it away. Normal water, you can wash it away. The AquaFlash mesh, as you can see, comes in a 4, 6, and 9-inch width. The 4-inch is for expansion joints, vertical and horizontal. Depending upon the size of the framing, the typical 3 and 5/8 that we normally deal with on most projects would require the 6-inch tape. Okay? If we've got a 6-inch stud, we'd use the 9-inch tape. And so depending upon your application, what you're going to find, every project's going to need a combination of all 3 typically. The AquaFlash itself comes in a 5-gallon, 40-pound pail, or it comes in a 1-gallon, 8-pound pail. What you'll find, a lot of people will buy one 1-gallon pail and then buy the balance of the project in the 5-gallon because it's much easier to work out of the 1-gallon pail rather than carrying a 5-gallon around and climbing up and down the scaffold, that sort of thing. It seems to work pretty well in going in that fashion. And you definitely want to wear gloves, and don't forget to do so. Prior to doing any of your expansion joints, you actually have to fill the expansion joint with a backer rod. Normally when we use that peel and stick membrane, does somebody have that sample that we were passing around? Thank you, Jim. What typically happens, just so that you can get an idea for that, this product can only be applied after your backstop material has been applied on the entire wall surface. The nice thing about the AquaFlash, it can be applied prior to or after. So recognize if I was going to use this product, the entire wall surface would have to be blue in color. What actually happens, and I'll put a little piece on here so that you can see, you adhere about half of it on one side of it, then you take your finger or the palm of your hand and tuck it in. And then you adhere it on the opposite side. That way, if you get expansion in that joint, it can stretch. If it's perfectly tight, this flashing tape, just like me pulling on it, it has a memory to it. It'll pull right back to its original form, okay? And so, again, if you use this product, the backstop has to go on first, no options. It has to go on prior to the application of this product. The nice thing about the AquaFlash, it can be either or. So if we've got an expansion joint, normally what you're going to find, and this is just a mock-up wall, there's going to be framing underneath here. You're not going to see open void space between the studs, okay? Typically you're going to have a rim joist, some slip track or something to that effect depending upon the assembly. What you actually have to do then is with a friction fit, just take and tuck that backer rod right in that space. And what that does, it gives you something to put the AquaFlash mesh over, but it also lets it stretch if there's any structural movement within the building. Okay? Now there's two ways to do that. You can either push it all the way in to where it's recessed inside the face of the sheathing approximately 1/4 of an inch. Where your studs, in this case where it's vertical, you're going to have to let it protrude out a little bit. But you just want it to stick out roughly 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch. Then once you get that in place, then you just need your gloves. And what a lot of the firms do that I work with, they actually use one guy to apply the material, another guy that actually applies the mesh into the material. And so one guy's always got a brush in his hand. A lot of times if I'm using the 5-gallon, I'll just use the lid, you know, just to hold the material so I'm not going back continuously. And so then once you start, you just start applying the materials and just put a good liberal coat over the entire surface. You'll notice that when it goes on, it's light blue in color. But as it dries, and you can see where the top, just before you came down, we put some of the material on the top, it dries to a black color. So then you just coat the surface.
How long is the drying time and what's the next step?
It depends upon environmental conditions. Under these temperature conditions, in about 30 minutes it's going to be dry. The key is when your first coat, Jeff, is that it's going to be just like this. I'm going to lay the mesh in, and then I'm going to coat it again. Once it turns black, you've got to coat it one more time. Then you're done. Okay? So the easy way to approach that is to take and apply it just like what I'm doing, and go ahead and work across the entire wall. Even if it gets drier than what you'd want, it's really better because that way you're going to build up the millage that you need. Okay? So then once you get it covered, typically everybody will pre-cut the AquaFlash mesh. And you'll see that the brush just really kind of helps you work the material. With a roller, you can't do that. And so I think what you'll find, most of the firms are just using a brush. Then once you get it coated, then you just take some additional material and just cover it. You'll notice that the original coat basically comes through. And then you just leave it until it turns black, and then coat it one more time. So again, the advantage would be if we have a project in late fall, we could go ahead and treat all the openings, treat all the expansion joints, virtually seal up the building. Then wait till spring, come back and clean the surface of the sheathing, and go ahead and apply the backstop if that's what's necessary. Even if you wanted to, let's say if it's late fall and you've got temperature conditions, in 2 hours that material can be dry. The nice thing about that is I could go ahead and make that joint weather tight and come back and apply the backstop in the spring if that's what's necessary. So you've got a lot more options with AquaFlash than you do with the flashing tape. Okay? Then we'll go ahead and treat the opening. If anybody has any questions, by the way, just speak up. But typically what you'll find is when you start at the sill, you treat the entire opening and then come out roughly 2 inches onto the face of the sheathing. This product cannot be used with a sheet type weather-resistive barrier such as stucco wrap or Tyvek or something to that effect. We only can use this with the fluid applied backstop. And so if someone's doing residential, then we would, if you're using the sheet type product, we would have to use the flashing tape in conjunction with that stucco wrap. Okay.
And the main difference between the flashing tape and that is just the 30-day.
The 30-day labor is about the same. Your cost as far as materials is about half. But recognize what you'll find if you talk to any of your contractors, after they deal with flashing tape on a day like today and it sticks to itself, and they end up cutting about half of a roll and throwing it away, it gets pretty expensive, even the labor to install. And so you're not going to have that problem with this. All the firms basically in our market, they don't even use flashing tape unless they absolutely have to because of the sheet type weather-resistant barrier. Okay? So you can just tuck it into the opening. And again, you'll notice by just having your gloves, and you can just take your brush and immediately tuck it right into the corners. Get the jams on each side. And then I like to use scissors because if your knife blade gets dull, then it won't bend or it won't cut like it should, and it'll actually pull the mesh. Same way with your flashing tape. Then you can just take your brush again. Now the question comes up a lot of times, can everyone see the edge or the exposed edge of the sheathing where you've got the gypsum core? If you take that flashing tape and try to get it to stick, it's not going to stick to that gypsum core. The question comes up, if you look real close, can you see a little bit of a bubble along that edge? That's normal and it should be anticipated. It's not going to stick completely to that surface. And so what you'll find is that by coating it the last time, that's what gives you your monolithic barrier. Okay? And so that's important to recognize. There's a couple different ways to do it. Tom likes to cut the pieces of mesh like this. Once you treat that, come in and coat it again. And then just put a diagonal piece, much like we do our standard detail mesh when we're applying our base coat. And that basically just reinforces that little corner. And so you can see there's just about no way that you cannot use your hands. And so you just got to make sure that you go through and treat it in that fashion. Okay? Then you treat the jam next. Take the height of the jam, add 4 inches to it so it turns 2 inches onto the sill. 2 inches onto the head. What you'll find as far as labor, the question comes up and your contractors will be asking, if I'm trying to estimate how much time it's going to take per window, it takes approximately 30 minutes per window once you start for one guy. And that's typically a 4x4 window or less. If you get to larger windows, then you're going to have to increase that. So in other words, let's say if you've got one guy that all he's doing is treating windows all day long, then he's going to do approximately 16 in one man day. And so they can go through, how many window openings do you have? Why is that critical? A lot of the contractors will bid the job per square foot. What happens if there's 400 windows versus 100? It's a significant difference in labor. So recognize that when you actually go through and do the estimation for this type of system, they need to make sure that they count the number of penetrations and then use approximately 30 minutes. Now, if they've never done it before, they need to increase that 45 minutes to an hour. There's a learning curve until they figure out the process. You know, just like pre-cutting all the pieces. I wouldn't even start until all the pieces are pre-cut. So you just grab the piece and go. So the ones that are doing it on a daily basis, they're figuring 30 minutes per window opening, a 4x4 window or less. Okay. Next step is then just go into the jam, lay it into the opening. Then once you get it in place, then just take your brush again. Then take your scissors, do your 2 cuts. So then you can see things just start flowing together once you just get the process down. Okay? And then typically when I'm doing the opening, before I put my last coat over the top of it, then I'll go ahead and lay it all in and then come back and get it. As you can see, the one on the top is a little bit more difficult as far as placement. That's why it's easier to work with two people. And again, it's just a scissor cut. Then what you'll see at that point, then you don't have any little holes right at the corner. And then at this point, this is your second coat. And you just make sure you got the mesh completely covered. And at that point, wait at least 30 minutes or it turns black, just coat it one more time. But typically what most firms will do, they'll treat as many openings, and then that day, let's say if they've got more than what they can treat in that day, they go ahead at the end of the day and just give it a quick coat over the top of it, and that's it. Okay? So if it's late fall when we start to get into some weather challenges, and obviously this product has some huge advantages because it can sit there as long as it needs to. Again, no exposure limitation to it. But the real key is just getting everything coated. Okay? Any questions?
Is it typical that it has to be applied at a certain temperature and it can't be lower?
Same temperature requirement of 40 degrees. But the advantage to this versus the flashing tape is that it might not be 2 hours, but let's say in 6 hours it's going to be black. And so once it turns black, it can get down below those temperatures because it's already dried and cured at that point. Okay? I mean, you wouldn't want to do it at this. I wouldn't want to go out at 35 degrees and put this material on. The temperature minimum is 40 degrees. But even in late fall in the northern part of the Midwest, there's a lot of days where it gets 70 degrees in the middle of the day, but at night it gets down to high 20s. And so with that in mind, you could treat this during the day and it's going to be fine. Go ahead and put the windows in, put the pan in, put the head flashing in, so on and so forth. That way they can get the building weather tight. Okay? Last thing, like I said, if you don't wash this out immediately, it's toast. You might as well just throw it away. Okay? One thing I didn't mention, and I'll just kind of recap a little bit. Right at your foundation, it has to be treated. Horizontal and vertical expansion joints have to be treated. All your penetrations and openings. But the number one area that I see in most markets that's not getting treated prior to the wood blocking going on is at the parapet. It has to be treated 2 inches onto the face of the sheathing, up on the back of the framing member prior to the wood blocking going on for your parapet cap. Take a look at your details. And so recognize that's going to be an important place because third-party inspection is going to pick up on that. You've got to make sure that they wrap that prior to the wood blocking going on. Okay? You can see that everything's pretty much turned black. You can see a little bit of the blue and a little of the other areas, but it's not quite where you'd want it. But at this point, all we'd have to do now is just coat it one more time, and it's done. Next step, if we're going to put the weather-resistive barrier product on, Backstop, and there's two different versions. Backstop NT texture, which you can see the label if somebody wants to take a look at that. That's the version that's utilized to treat the joints in every case. If you're going to trowel over the entire wall surface with that same product, you don't have to spot the fastener heads. But if you're going to use the roller applied version, which is called Backstop NT Smooth, then you have to go through and spot every fastener, treat all the joints. Then come back, and over dense glass, you've got to roll 2 coats of the smooth. What you'll find is that by the time all I have to do is put the self-adhesive 4-inch grid tape over all board joints, inside and outside corners, then I just basically have to treat that tape prior to coating the entire wall surface. So the texture is a thicker viscosity, thicker thickness in other words. So when you take a look at it, it's a trowelable consistency for anyone that hasn't seen it. Thanks for cleaning those up, Tom. And all you're actually doing is just embedding that tape. Now, the gaps in the sheathing, if any exist, the maximum gap that we can go over it with like that tape is 1/4 of an inch. If it goes beyond the 1/4 of an inch, then the sheathing needs to be replaced in that area. Let's say if somebody punches through the sheathing with a forklift, that section's got to be replaced. Okay? Now, if we're going to use the smooth, that means all these fastener heads, then I'd have to come through, much like doing drywall, and spot every one. If I'm just going to use the texture and trowel it, then all I actually have to do after I treat the joints, wait till you can't disturb it, and just for the sake of demonstration, I'm going to go ahead and coat it now. Just imagine we're 30 minutes down the road. Then all I actually have to do is coat that surface. And so you'll see that even though that tape's not dry yet, then I just coat the surface and it's done. As far as labor, in our market, the contractors have figured out that there's about a 40% labor savings by just using the texture alone and troweling the material. And so that's pretty much across the board what a lot of the firms do. If some of the firms have less skilled labor, then they will use the smooth and have somebody, hand them a paint roller. Otherwise, you just coat it and move on. And so again, the nice advantage to these combination of products, you can do either one first, which is personal preference based upon those specific job site conditions. And so when you're all said and done with a combination of products, the only thing that you should see on that wall is either Backstop, the blue material, and AquaFlash, or flashing tape. That's it. You shouldn't see any framing member, any sheathing members anywhere. Base of the wall, top of the wall, all penetrations and terminations. Just use this as a gauge. Once this dries, if there's a GP emblem, even when you put 2 coats on it, you're always going to see that emblem read through. But you won't see the yellow. And so there's no way with 1 coat when you roller apply it that you're going to get to that point. The other important consideration, what's the coverage? It's all dependent upon the specific substrate that's involved. Dense glass is different than exterior gyp sheathing versus exposure 1 plywood versus masonry block. So as an example, typically what I would recommend over masonry block is a parge coat of Genesis then go with a trowel version or a roller version Backstop NT. It's just much more economical and feasible so that you get that filled in and get your monolithic weather barrier. It's not that it's required over that masonry surface, but when specified, it's becoming commonplace here. Okay? So recognize that the different substrates have a listed different coverage rate, so just refer to your specifications and details for that specific project.